This video looks at creating a Photoshop document and then using that Photoshop document or PSD file in a Final Cut Pro project. So the type of PSD file is just a basic layered file, and you can include imported or graphics that have been copied and pasted into the PSD, and you can also have text layers. So this is quite handy if you want to do some very kind of customized design work on your text that you wouldn't be able to do in Final Cut Pro. You don't need to rasterize the text. You can leave the text as editable text in Photoshop. Now before I go any further with it, I'll just show you how you would actually set up a Photoshop document from scratch before you bring it into Final Cut Pro. If you create a new document, you're given some options, and the presets allow you to select film and video. So when you select film and video, it will also allow you to specify a particular video format. So you can see you have all of the usual formats here: PAL, NTSC, and you also have HDV 1080, which is the HDV format that we use in the college. So if I click on that, you'll see that it gives a width of 1440 by 1080. So this is the HDV screen resolution, so it'll come out the right size and it'll fit perfectly in the project when we're in Final Cut Pro. So I click OK. You'll get a warning. That's basically just telling you that the PSD file might look slightly different on the monitor as it will when you have it on a broadcast monitor. So I'm going to click OK, and you will see the image is going to be the same dimensions. Now if I make my guides visible here, so if I go to show guides, that the guides are placed in particular areas. These are your title and action safe areas. So if you're creating a graphic that's going to be used in Final Cut Pro, then you need to make sure that all of your action, your actors and your movement and such is within the outside guides, and any text that you put in to your graphic are within the inside guides. So the inside guides are your title safe, your outside guides are your action safe. Okay, so I have a document here already called text_images.psd. So I'm going to hide this for the moment and flip over to Final Cut Pro, and I'm going to import that file. Okay, so now that I have my file in here, you'll probably notice that it looks, for all intents and purposes, like a sequence. It has the same sequence icon here, and it is really, for all intents and purposes, now a sequence. So the important difference between bringing a JPEG in or a video in is that when you open up this or double click on this in the browser, it won't open it up automatically for you in the viewer. So if I double click on this, you'll see that it actually opens it up as a layered sequence, and I have all of my layers in here, and if you look up on the canvas you'll see that they are all individual objects that can then be moved around and animated in any way that you want. So when you have the Photoshop file, you can do any of the motion effects that we looked at, such as animating the size, the rotation, the center, etc. Okay, so I'll just undo that. So for instance, if I wanted to quickly just show you, if I wanted to rotate my bicycle image, I could just rotate it using the parameters there. Now at this stage you have a few options. You can work with this Photoshop document as it is here, or you could copy and paste the layers out of here into the main sequence and work that way. So that's just a copy and paste edit that I did there between the two sequences. Now the important thing to remember is that this sequence represents this PSD, so as soon as you start playing around with these layers, then you don't have an original in here anymore to work with. That this is, for all intents and purposes, now a sequence. It's not, it is a bit more destructive than working with video or JPEGs, where you always have the original to go back to when you want to use it. So let's say, for instance, I have my sequence here, and I'll just do a very, very quick animation, just a second long movement here of the text. So I'll just double click this to make sure that it's load it up here in the viewer, and then go back and put another keyframe and just move it up slightly. So now I have a very, very simple animation here. I'll just render the timeline enough so that I'll see my animation. Okay, so very, very simple. So at this stage, I can go into my main sequence, and if I want to bring that graphic, that PSD down with the animation already done to it, I could just click and drag my PSD from the browser and bring it down there. So now my entire Photoshop document is now resting in the main sequence, and so what I'm effectively doing now is I'm nesting one sequence inside in another, and I look at nesting sequences in a previous video. So you can see the effect now. I'll just make that slightly larger. Okay, so because I have one sequence inside another now, I can actually make an adjustment to that sequence in and of itself now as well. So I'm going to just shrink it down so you can see that I can take that entire sequence, or that PSD file that now appears as a sequence, and I can make an overall adjustment to that. So just to recap, when you're using Photoshop documents, you need to first of all set up your documents in such a way that it's going to be the right size, the right aspect ratio, create your layers, make sure that everything sits in the action and title safe areas, and when you import it into Photoshop, it comes in as a sequence. When you open up that sequence, it doesn't open it up in the viewer, it opens it up as a timeline. You can adjust any of these individual layers as individual components, and you can do any kind of animation or motion that you can do in the motion tab. And when you have created an effect, you can click and drag that Photoshop document down and use it and reuse it as much as you want. But just don't forget that as soon as you create that initial animation, every time you bring that down onto the timeline, it's going to have that animation in it. So that might be something that you want. For instance, perhaps if I just shrink that down a good bit and move it up here, shrink that down, so that you could have many different versions of your animation happening simultaneously. Okay, so that's using Photoshop documents in Final Cut Pro.